Welcome to the Debka Files, exclusive news, insight, and political analysis from the Middle East and around the world. Coming up on the show this week, Israel agrees to shorten its buffer zone on its border with Syria after pressure from the U.S. and Moscow. An in-depth look at rising tensions in the Gulf as Debka analysts say the crisis will impact Israel-Syria and the Palestinian territories as well. A Debka Files exclusive reveals a secret decision to strip Iraqi Kurdistan's 8.5 million inhabitants of their limited autonomy status and break up their territory. Now to our top story. A major Israeli concession has made it possible for Moscow to walk off with a big gain for its allies in the memorandum agreed by U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin on Syria. This according to our sources. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin met 3 times on the sidelines of a summit of Asia-Pacific leaders in Vietnam.
Можно сказать, что работа на полях АТС была полезной и успешной, потому что не так просто было выйти на заявление по Сирии наших.
Debka sources revealing that both Moscow and Washington have pushed Israel to be flexible as to the size of the buffer zone with Syria on its northern border, leading Israel to agree to a buffer zone of 20 kilometers from its northern Golan border with Syria. That's far from its original demand of 50 kilometers. Israel had been lobbying Moscow and Washington for reassurances that Iranian and Hezbollah forces will not be allowed to deploy near its border or set up bases within Syria. Israel's Regional Cooperation Minister signaling the country will keep up its military strikes across its frontier to stop any encroachment from Iran-allied forces.
ההסכם שנחתם איננו נותן מענה לדרישה הישראלית החד משמעית שלא תהיינה התפתחויות שמקרבות כוחות של חיזבאללה או של איראן לגבול ישראל, סוריה וצפון. יש בכך שיקוף של הבנה שישראל הגדירה קווים אדומים.
This 20-kilometer deep area in the Quneitra region of the Syrian Golan will serve as a de-escalation zone monitored by Russian troops with Syrian forces available for their use. To break this all down, let's turn to this week's guest, research fellow at Tel Aviv University, Dr. Nir Bohms. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be here.
Dr. Bohms, a new line is being drawn for this buffer zone at 20 kilometers from northern Israel. What does this mean for military forces present in southern Syria and for the safety of these borders?
Well, the new line is not entirely new, and really the issue here is whether there is going to be a new status quo and what will be that status quo in the south. Just to remind you, already in the Astana talks, there was a discourse about the foreign forces in Syria, particularly also the Iranian forces and the pressure for all the foreign forces to leave Syria. What we've seen later on is that these understandings are being reiterated and they are changed into a new situation in where the Iranian forces are actually getting a sort of a seal of approval to stay, at least in some places. In some ways, if this is a concession, I'm not sure if this is an Israeli concession, but perhaps an American concession, because the American position vis-a-vis this issue was that obviously the Iranian forces needs to leave. President Trump had at least attempted to have a much tougher line when it comes to Iran. As far as Israel is concerned, Israel has not been an official party to this. Of course, it seems that with the Jordanian channels, with the American channels, with the Russian channels, Israel had a way of at least speaking its mind and debating or arguing that the Iranian proximity to the border is very, very difficult. But the Iranian proximity is dangerous irrespective of this line of 20 kilometers, because for those who are looking carefully at the terrain, they understand that whether the Iranians themselves are going to be present at 20 or 50 kilometers has little to do with the proxy powers and the militias that are actually present much closer to the Israeli border.
So what do you believe has made Israel consent to such a small buffer zone?
I'm not sure that Israel had consented. This is on the contrary, I think this particular line seems to be an improvement vis-a-vis some of what we've heard in the last few weeks about these types of negotiations and agreements. At least there is a recognition that these forces needs to be further away. Again, but this is a bit of a line in the sand. Who would be able to say what is who is an Iranian. Is an Iranian proxy Hezbollah considered an Iranian? Is Iranian proxy, which is now Syrian, considered to be an Iranian? Or this is a part of the agreement, or this is not a part of the agreement? So I think in the broad picture, this agreement does not change much in terms of the dangers that Israel faces in the southern part of Syria. But what it does do, it perhaps again gives a seal of approval to the fact that Iranian presence is allowed. And we've seen again recent reports. The BBC just revealed a couple of days ago that a new Iranian base is being built. We've heard a number of such reports about permanent presence, permanent Iranian presence. That means that Syria, that used to be before the revolution, perhaps a transfer country for the conflict. It wasn't a real front. It was a pass-through state. But now it really becomes a front, and it becomes a post for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and for the Iranian militias and proxies.
I want to focus for a second on Russia. An anonymous U.S. State Department official said Russia had agreed to work with the Syrian regime to remove Iranian-backed forces from the Golan Heights frontier with Israel. Can and will Russia act on this?
Well, the Russian interest when it comes to Syria, they have security interest, they have economic interest, and they have a hegemony interest. The particular area of the south is not necessarily a big part of these interests, also because Russia would like to keep additional alliances, Israel being one of them. Therefore, the Russians do not have a particular stake in the south, and certainly do not have a particular stake to strengthen the Iranian axis and the Shia axis, and to strengthen groups like Hezbollah that, again, as a part of the broader interests, are not necessarily good for Russia, and they do not necessarily would like to have Iran stronger than it currently is. So there's a confluence of interest here, and it may be the case that the Russians were able to work with the Americans and also with Israel. And just to remind you that the Israelis and the Russians are very much in touch. The Prime Minister and the President speak often and meet often, and even if they did not meet at this particular junction, it seems that Israelis have been very much a part of the discourse. And therefore, again, that part makes sense. Whether Russia will actually work to take the Iranians out, that's a different story. I think the consensus here is that Israel will need to take care of its own interests by itself.
Dr. Nir Bomes, thank you very much for joining us. Meanwhile, ISIS has recaptured its last bastion in Syria, the eastern city of Abu Kamal, forcing Hezbollah troops to retreat to 1 to 2 kilometers from the town with heavy casualties. Only last week, Syria claimed victory in the border city, which lies just about 10 kilometers away from Iraq. But ISIS fighters used tanks, car bombs, heavy artillery, and wave after wave of assault to reverse their defeat. 48 hours of blanket aerial bombardment by Russian jets failed to stop the ISIS assault. Other reports are saying ISIS leaders have taken refuge in the city, including IS chief Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. While these reports are unconfirmed, Debka File's military sources say ISIS has regained control of this key border area and, more importantly, access to the Euphrates Valley, which straddles the border, planting float mines on its water to turn the river into a defensive barrier and posting a fleet of speedboats packed with explosives. Our analysts are saying Putin and Trump may have been premature when assuming ISIS were done for in Syria and Iraq during their conversation in Vietnam. Now to rising tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, notably over Lebanon and Yemen, after the Lebanese prime minister resigned last week and is now sitting in Saudi capital. Soon after Saad Hariri resignation, Iran-backed Yemeni Houthi rebels fired a missile towards Riyadh's international airport. The kingdom has since ordered the closure of all of Yemen's airports, seaports, and land crossings, including Hudaydah, the only opening from which to bring desperately needed humanitarian supplies into the devastated country. Debka Weekly's sources in Oman revealing Iran was quick to prepare its response, pointing their Yemen-based missiles at ports and airfields in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The U.S. Fleet Command in the Gulf, as well as the air and naval forces of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait, all put on readiness for attack. All this on standby, but so far Lebanon the first to catch fire, with Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah saying Saudi Arabia has declared war on Lebanon and its Iran-backed troops. He accused Riyadh of detaining Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri and forcing him to resign.
من الواضح أن السعودية والمسؤولين السعوديين أعلنوا الحرب على لبنان وعلى حزب الله في لبنان، لكن اسمحوا لي لكم حرب على لبنان، ما تحطوا هدف القضاء على حزب الله. مهما فعلت السعودية وقامت به وقامت الدنيا وقعدتها وفتلت الكرة الأرضية وجابت عاصفة حزم ودفعت إسرائيل إلى الحرب، لا يستطيعون القضاء على حزب الله.
Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah warning Israel not to intervene in this showdown, but Debka analysts foreseeing the blaze not just impacting the Gulf and Red Sea regions, but also Israel, Syria, and the Palestinian territories. As the Lebanese Prime Minister stayed in Riyadh, PA President Mahmoud Abbas, whose Fatah party recently reconciled with rival Gaza-ruled Hamas, was also summoned to the Saudi capital for an impromptu meeting with King Salman. Joining us to discuss Iran's regional involvement is IDF Reserve Brigadier General Gal Hilsh, the author of the book Defensive Shield. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Shalom.
First of all, Mr. Hirsch, how did we get to this situation where Iran is so close to Syria's borders and so involved in everything going on in this region?
Well, unfortunately, since the Islamic Revolution in Iran in the late 70s, the Iranians, and again, unfortunately, has succeeded to encircle the state of Israel by their will to create a direct access to the free world, and especially to Israel, by deploying Iran by proxies along our borders. They did that very successfully with Hezbollah, which is not anymore an authentic Shiite movement in Lebanon. It is an Iranian army. Once upon a time, I could say it's an Iranian division. Today, I must say, unfortunately, it's an Iranian army deployed along our border in Lebanon. We saw the results of that during 2006 war in about 11 years ago. They did the same regarding Gaza Strip. Just after the Israeli disengagement from Gaza Strip, we found Iran again by financing, equipping, training, and supporting very, very closely Hamas and Islamic jihadists. And let me say strategically, the Iranians are very successful in actually surrounding us by the genies, the radical fundamental genies they create industrially through their well-prepared and well-trained machine in Tehran. And we are today surrounded by the radical fundamental jihadist genie in the north by Hezbollah, in the south by Hamas and Islamic jihadists. They act via Sudan and via other places all around us. They act in Yemen as well. They act in Iraq. And as you see, just right now, we're facing their deployment and strong involvement in Syria. And inside Syria, we see Iran in a very, very strong infrastructure, and it looks like they're here to stay. It is not just sending Hezbollah to do that action or that action.
Right now, tensions are high in the region, but do you expect it to stay just that, as tension, or do you expect us to be heading towards some sort of larger conflict?
Well, since it means that Iran is inside Syria using the smoke cover of fighting ISIS in order to deploy itself inside Syria, we see them today very close to the Israeli border. And I just want to remind the people who watch us right now what has happened when Iran has deployed itself by Hezbollah along the Lebanese-Israeli border. What is happening even through these days in Gaza Strip and in any UGA, as we say, the military terminology of ungoverned areas. The Iranians actually enter into each vacuum, and since then there is no vacuum. They are there, they deploy themselves, and they export their Islamic revolution. Actually, they do that all around Israel in order, as mentioned, to create a direct accessibility to Israel and to the free world. But Iran, it's a global instability creator. They use the double hat syndrome. They use their hat as diplomacy, as a state, which looks like a part of family of nations. But parallel, they are one of the biggest terror headquarters on earth. And they use all the worldwide infrastructure as a nation in order to deploy terror organizations like all the Revolutionary Guard activities, Quds Force, Hezbollah, and other terror organizations that enjoy the Iranian activities by proxy.
Do you see any sort of alliance or power shift in the region in order to counter Iran?
Well, I think Iran was never really the problem of Israel alone. The Iranian problem, as I mentioned before, it's a global problem. They do their best in order to develop WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, to develop their missile program. They do not aim all the missiles only towards Israel. When we speak about thousands of kilometers potential missiles, we speak actually about a threat to the rest of the world all around it. They want to actually put themselves as a regional power and a global key player. And right now, I believe that this is a wake-up call to the world, but especially in our region, of course, all the moderate states like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, like others, understand what's the Iranian threat. And by that unique situation, actually, I see mutual interests. Maybe it's an opportunity. Who knows what's going to happen? Right now, thinking about the threat to Israel, for Israel, an Iranian army, not only in Lebanon and in Gaza, in any UGA around us, but along the Israeli-Syrian border, it is something that we should take as a concern.
IDF Reserve Brigadier General Gal Hirsch, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much. Shalom.
Meanwhile, we can reveal Iran's president has tried to ban the transfer of missiles to Yemeni Houthi insurgents, but failed to get the order past the country's main military arm, the IRGC. According to Debka's exclusive intelligence sources, Hassan Rouhani issued a secret presidential directive banning the transfer of surface ballistic Burkan 2H missiles on November 5th, a day after one such missile was fired from northern Yemen to Riyadh's airport. Iran denies shipping missiles to Yemen. Debka File's military sources reporting that the Houthi rebels were getting set to hit the UAE ports of Khalifa, Zayed, and Mirfa. Those are all elements of the free trade zone. The UAE has put air defense missile batteries in place at the three ports. Now to a Debka Files exclusive, a secret decision to strip Iraqi Kurdistan's 8.5 million inhabitants of their limited autonomy status and break up territory was under discussion this week. Baghdad, Tehran, and Ankara are considering splitting up the Kurdish Republic Governorate, or KRG, into three disconnected enclaves, Erbil, Suleymaniye, and Dohuk, and any quarters linking them will be held under Baghdad's control. The plan also includes disbanding the Kurdish Peshmerga, placing some units into the National Army and others into the local police force. Still unknown, the fate of Kirkuk and its oil fields, now ruled by the Iraqi Army and Shiite PMU forces. As this show goes on to air, oil continues to flow as usual and is being piped via Turkey to its regular clients, including Israel. But while Russian state-owned energy giant Rosneft has taken control of the Kurdish oil company, the Kurds have lost 300,000 barrels of oil a day. Meanwhile, the Iraqi government has vowed to continue its sanctions on the KRG, deploying arms to the disputed territories and banning international flights.
بعد أن يتم إنفاذ هذا الأمر وضمان نشر القوات الاتحادية في كل المناطق المسمى الدستور المتنازع عليها، عندها يمكن القول أن هنالك إمكانية للحوار مع الإقليم، ولكن هذا الحوار يجب أن يكون تحت سقف الدستور.
Debka Weekly's sources report that all attempts by Iraqi Kurdish leaders to reach the Trump administration and appeal for help against these plans have gone unanswered. Military historian Dr. Danny Orbach of the Hebrew University joins us now for comment. Dr. Orbach, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for hosting me.
First of all, what's the current situation for the Kurds in Iraq, and what does their future hold?
The current situation for the Kurds in Iraq is very bleak. They completely misread the international situation. The international community today is not interested in self-determination. It's interested in stability. It's interested in sovereignty, and especially it's not interested in destabilizing countries like Iraq. So nobody supported the Kurds. All of our powerful neighbors fiercely opposed their independence. There was an economic blockade. The Kurds lost a lot of territory to Iraq, including and especially the disputed areas around Kirkuk. The Kurdish economy is in dire straits now, and the future is very bleak.
And this idea of breaking up a territory sounds like what is happening to the Kurds in Syria with their 3 cantons there. Will this plan be accepted by the Kurds, and do they even have the power to say no?
The Kurds don't have the power to say no, unfortunately. In Syria, they still have a little bit of prestige. After all, they liberated ISIS capital of Raqqa. In Iraq, they don't have even that. This is a very inefficient, very corrupted, in fact, party dictatorship in the Kurdish regional government in Iraq. They lost much of their international credibility, but in Syria, they don't have the power to say no as well. There is a very important strategic issue here. The Kurds have no access and no outlet to the sea. Countries which are landlocked could be easily besieged by their neighbors. And therefore, a country which is landlocked cannot declare independence without the support of at least one powerful neighbor which has access to the sea. And everybody opposed the Kurdish plans. The Kurds didn't have it, and therefore their plans crumbled. They don't have the power to say no, not anymore.
And the Kurds aren't going to give up so easily. What may be their next step?
But they gave up already. We saw that the president of the Kurdish regional government, Masoud Barzani, signed an agreement, or actually it was a unilateral declaration. He virtually surrendered to Iraqi demands. He notified the president of Iraq that he is ready to enter into negotiation based on the Iraqi constitution. That is as part of Iraq. In fact, he nullified the independence referendum. And the territory the Kurds lost, nobody even thinks they would get it back. So it's completely a lose-lose situation.
Dr. Danny Orbach, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now to a roundup of this week's headlines that you may have missed, the news in brief. The Qatari foreign minister has denigrated rival Saudi Arabia for having no exit strategy from its crisis with the Emirates, just like its policy in Yemen and Lebanon. This according to Al-Tahani in a closed-door high-level meeting in Doha Monday morning. He also added that Iran will enter wherever a vacuum emerges, saying if Qatar leaves Gaza, Iran will replace it. The Trump administration has put only one peace plan on the table, and it's take it or leave it. They say it consists of recognition of Palestinian state solely on paper in exchange for an Israeli settlement freeze, economic concessions in Area C, and the easing of movement through the Jordan and Egypt crossings. All this to normalize Arab relations with Israel. If the Palestinians say no, the Trump administration says it will back away from its commitment to solving the conflict. Despite the Saudi blockade on Yemen and a dire shortage of food and medical supplies in parts of the country controlled by Houthi rebels, The Economist has discovered that one thing is still getting in: Baskin-Robbins ice cream, reaching the rebel-held capital Sana'a on refrigerated trucks driven overland from Amman. There are 6 branches of ice cream stores serving thousands of customers every day. The bestseller? Pralines. Mohammed Al-Aghefe has more than 19 million social media followers and has been rated the region's most popular social media personality, appealing to the youth not with makeup hacks or carpool karaoke, but with high-end production videos telling stories of everyday subjects. The Saudi-based star is all over social media platforms with messages such as "Don't exchange holiday greetings with non-Muslims." For more on stories you heard from here and more, take a look at our website. That's Debka.com, and sign on to the weekly newsletter. That's all for now. Thank you for being with us.